Welcome, everybody. We are at our start time. Per general practice, we'll wait a minute or two and let other people join in. Take advantage of our last few minutes. Julie, I see you're with us, so at your convenience, you can start us off whenever you are in a position and feel we are ready.
Great, Jacob. Thank you so much. I think we'll go ahead then and launch our meeting today. It is good to see all of you. I did want to just share with you all that we did receive some, I think, critical feedback from some of our partners here on the group about just processes and some things that we want to really kind of ensure that we tighten up. So I want you to know we took that to heart to be sure that we're getting everything updated in a timely fashion to the web pages, that you have access to information in a really timely fashion, and that we're really, being able to focus in on getting a lot of things accomplished and then noting those accomplishments so that we can really keep this group moving forward. So I just really appreciate the feedback as we continue to just work this group together and making sure that it really does deliver on the very important mission that we have here together as a group. So thank you guys for that. And I'm going to go ahead though and turn it over to Jacob and ask that Jacob really kind of keep us on track today and keep us timely onto that agenda and really kind of facilitate us so that we can really get through what we have here in front of us today. So again, thank you. And we are here to really kind of support you all as we get this work done together and being sure that the processes and the ways in which we're doing this work are working for you all. We certainly appreciate all of the time and effort that you give to this, recognizing that that is a big commitment and we really want to value your time and be sure that it's getting us to where we need to be. So Jacob, it's all yours.
Thank you, Julie, and welcome again, everybody. Let's dive in quickly today. Here's our norms. I know I feel very repetitious in repeating these, but we do like to show them every time just to be sure we're all on the same page. We are a well-oiled machine. If in nothing else, it is at this point, it's knowing our norms. So thank you to everybody. We're going to make some progress today, and we're going to come with decisions, and we're going to have a vote today, and we're really going to use the lens of Chapter 57 to help us move forward and all of the wonderful discussion that we've had to this point to really think about, how do people in Montana obtain a license, apply for a license, and advance a license. The keep and renew piece, we may not get into today specifics because some of that lives in other parts of the chapter itself, but we're really thinking about getting a license, advancing a license, and we're going to make progress today. And again, everything we've talked about up to this point is going to feed into this conversation so that we can narrow down our recommendations. want to begin by thanking everybody who had a chance to do the homework this week. Crystal will cover that towards the end of the meeting or after we have this initial discussion. Some of us depend upon that. And I want to thank Angela, who I see just jumped on as well, for sharing her ideas that were put forth last week, which we were able to discuss and see briefly. But seeing them on paper was very helpful for me, and I know will also guide our discussion today. Next slide, Crystal. So, using everything that we've talked about, including the specific language that Angela shared last week, here is what I would like to put before you. This is another representation of licensing in Montana. Not using the language we have, but thinking about it like this. There's a provisional license, there's an initial license or your first license, and then there's a second level to this license. Now, please do not allow ourselves to get hung up on what the terminology is here. We're just thinking about 3 levels of licenses. And we have talked about a lot of things from the praxis to military spouse, reciprocity with other states, and a lot of different hangups that happen within this. So I'm going to ask that everybody, let's take 3 minutes, read what is on this screen, thinking about provisional, sort of that initial first license, and then a license that comes after that, and think about what's here that we want to keep for sure, and then what do we need to add? And this will guide our recommendations as to what does it take to get a license in Montana, and then to move through different tiers of a license. So 3 minutes starting now on my clock. That'll be 1:40 Mountain Time whenever we come back together. Everybody read what's on the slide, please. That's our time. We're Zoom fatigued, I can tell. We're mostly off camera today, but if anybody needs another minute, you can raise your hand and I'll grant another minute. Seeing some thumbs up. Excellent. Okay, so let's start with the hard question. And that's what's missing. And we can start anywhere on the chart, but it seems to make sense to sort of work left to right. And I'd love to hear from Mike or Mike, are you available to chat today? Or are you listening in?
I'm here.
Okay, so I'd love to hear from our on the ground district reps first today and thinking about this. So Mike, and then I might call on you, Sue, and others can jump in. But what do you see that's missing, Mike, that's essential that we need to have in here?
You know, one of the things I'm looking at that second, and I guess maybe I need a little help here. I'm trying to walk through a scenario of what happened in Missoula this summer, and I'm trying to see where something would fit in. So I'm trying to use this case. Basically what happened was they have an individual who has a doctorate in history from Harvard. He has been teaching at the university level, also has experience teaching in 2 different states and is licensed in those states, but cannot get a license in Montana due to not having teacher prep. But now I'm deciding if I need to, I'm thinking maybe my information may be incorrect, because if he has a license from another state, it seems like he would, well, I guess maybe he wouldn't have teacher prep. If to get a license in that other state, you wouldn't have needed one. So if this gentleman cannot get a license here, I guess I'm trying to figure out why that is and where we would have to make adjustments so an individual like that could get a license. I would love some input from anybody else on that one.
So I want to hear the input as well, but I want to ask a question. And that is, as we think about the purpose of Chapter 57, do we write into statute language that we think will cover every case that may come before us? Or is there processes in place, such as the board review, that could handle those situations? We could walk ourselves down a path that more complicates things by trying to think of every case. And so I don't know what, I don't know all of the ins and outs, but I know there are people on the call who do. But in the sense of a case like that, my guess is that it is more uncommon than common, that would be the perfect use of sort of the board review of a special case versus trying to write the special case into the ARM itself. That's my question.
And I totally agree. We cannot write statute that will cover everything. But unfortunately, what I'm hearing is that this case scenario is a more common occurrence than I think it should be. So I guess my question is the board that is reviewing the cases, are they going strictly by statute, or how flexible are they being, or are they looking for something more in statute that gives them the authority to grant these licenses in special cases?
So McCall, I see you shaking your head. I think the question there is, what sort of freedom does the board have to make decisions?
Yeah, Jacob, 1057-109 allows the Board of Public Ed to grant a license that comes from the superintendent of public instruction recommended for licensure on an unusual case circumstance. And we've seen a lot of those come before us. And so the board has the ability at that point to be presented with an unusual case. Mike, sounds like the situation that you're talking about could definitely come before the board. And then the board has the ability to look at statute to make a reasonable decision to determine whether a person should be licensed or not as an educator in Montana. So not always do they go exactly by statute. And I think that's why it's an unusual case. They don't always fit within statute. So I think that they are MCA administrative rules, So I think that that's the whole purpose of the unusual case, is that they don't fit quite in the box originally.
So could I ask a question to piggyback on that, McCall? What is a timeline look like if somebody fits into those cases? How long does it take to go to get to the board and then have a decision made and then have somebody licensed to teach?
So Mike, by the time that we get the unusual case at the Board of Public Ed, we try to put them on our next scheduled agenda. We meet 6 times a year, so every other month. And then the board typically, and as long as I've been here and have witnessed the board proceedings, make a decision at that meeting. So they'll make a determination after they hear the case for the educator on whether they should be licensed in Montana or not. So it happens pretty quickly, and the board even just had a special meeting to determine one instance for an unusual case last week. So they've been very flexible in these situations.
Thank you. That gives me a whole different take on some of what we've talked about then. Thanks, McCall.
I need to unmute. Sean had a question. Crystal, can you speak to what criteria might determine an unusual case?
Well, I think it's sort of what McCall said, that it just doesn't fit within a box. And, there's certain situations where maybe a person doesn't have the out-of-state 5 years experience in teaching, but they've worked at a collegiate level. Could we use that experience as well? What have we had recently?
There's one where an educator didn't have a recommendation from an EPP, but had been teaching and passed some kind of test, not necessarily the praxis, but a different kind of test in that subject area. The board granted her licensure. So we see a lot of very unusual cases that just, like I said, don't quite fit in these boxes.
Another one was a teacher came endorsed from another state, and I think it was 11 or 12 different endorsement areas, but didn't have 3 years of teaching experience in all of them, but some experience, and was only able to get the endorsements in the ones that she had 3 or more years. And that was granted. So, I mean, I guess there's not really a rule in terms of, what to bring. What happens is that these cases come, come to the licensure specialists, Becky and Lori, and they either bring it to my attention, or as I'm reviewing, I see them as well. And then I bring them to licensure committee here at the OPI, and that's how they then go forward. With that group's decision to bring it as an unusual case. A letter is drafted, signed by the superintendent, and then it goes to the Board of Public Ed. So that's the process. But typically, if I feel like it doesn't fit a rule, but geez, why is this person not able to get licensed? I bring it to the committee, and then it goes from there. So I hope that helps.
Sean, you have your hand up.
Yeah. And just so I think then my takeaway from this is that it could be any number of unusual circumstances that fall into this category, of course, as stated, unusual cases. And then it'll just be, it's just up to whomever is the licensing folks as to determine whether it's a yay or nay. That's kind of the size of it.
The Board of Public Ed has the ultimate determination on who gets licensure under unusual cases. It'll initially go to the licensure specialists, and if it doesn't quite fit, they'll then send it to the superintendent, who will send a letter to the board asking for it to be considered under unusual circumstances.
Okay, so the superintendent is the advocate essentially, but the licensure person at OPI goes ahead and touches base, just so I understand what this, how this process is happening, and how it fits into the rest of the picture. So the OPI person will say that this is an unusual case. I was going to touch base with the superintendent requesting this, and then that superintendent then will send a letter or request to the BPE. Is that correct?
The superintendent of public instruction sends the request to the board. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sharon, can you expand upon what number 10 is in 412?
Yeah, I don't know if you can hear me very well because I'm logging in at home and my internet is a little squishy. Can you hear what I'm saying?
We can.
Okay. Number 10 says applicants with graduate degrees in an endorsable area may use experience instructing in relevant college or university courses as credit in that endorsement area for licensure. I don't remember how often when I was on the board that was applied. And of course, if they got licensure right away, we would have never known about that. But I guess one of my questions was, does that cover some of those cases that we're talking about?
Crystal, do you have any experience utilizing number 10?
Jacob, this is
Yep.
Julie.
Yep.
I can
Julie?
answer some of that questions. I think a couple of pieces here. So Sharon, to answer your question, yes, there are times when number 10 has been used to grant people. We did have an unusual case recently where a professor from MSU who instructs the administrative law course was required to take that course. And so that was like a really unusual case because we were asking him to provide evidence that he needed to take the Montana state law course in order for him to obtain his principal license, but he was in fact the one who was teaching that course. And so we had gone as an unusual case to say, not necessarily to give him credit for his teaching under 1057 for 1010, but to say, could he, in lieu of taking the course, provide the evidence that he had in teaching it in place of that. So that was like kind of a really weird, unusual situation. In relation to the situation that Mike's bringing, I think what is interesting in that particular case is that that is something that we see common in some situations. So it's not unusual, which is there are folks that are coming to Montana, and they would be an out-of-state candidate, for example, and they would be in the initial column here in this slide that Jacob has posted for us, where they don't have 5 years of experience, and they've been in an alternative preparation program. So they were in an alternative preparation program, approved, validated through a university recommendation. They've completed student teaching. They've passed the praxis, they've got their safety stuff with their background check, they've got the EFA, but they only have 3 years of experience. And so that puts them then back into the only item that they would be eligible for would be a provisional license, which then means they would have to enroll and attend an EPP program for additional coursework, which is generally assessed by the EPP program to say, okay, let's see what you have, what you need, and that they would have to get that within 3 years. And so it's becoming somewhat of a regular ongoing problem, not unusual, where people are like, but I've done all of that. I have 3 years of experience. I've taught, I've met all of these requirements, and I really don't want to go back and do more coursework and get additional pieces within the 3 years. Even though I'm eligible for it, I don't want to do it. So in the case that Mike is bringing up, and we have such, all kinds of different things, that person's eligible for a provisional license and has been offered that, but the person's like, why do I have to? And so the gap that Mike's bringing up is kind of this piece between the provisional and initial. They can get licensed, but they don't want the provisional license. They want the initial license, or what we call in Montana, the standard license. I hope that helps a little bit.
So Julie, let's dig into that just a little bit deeper. When an alternative program, you're thinking, is it more like a Teach for America type program where there's no university coursework associated with it? They simply enter the classroom after so many years. They then become eligible in whatever state they were in for a standard license? Or what would it be? Because if it was a university, my question would be, if it was a university alternative program, would we not consider that to be an EPP?
So for example, so let's take the state of Florida for a second. They have in the state of Florida where they will require teachers that give them a provisional license, and they'll say, within the 3 years that we're granting you this provisional license, you need to demonstrate that you have an effective evaluation. And then we need you to attend certain coursework, but you don't attend the coursework or the PD at a university system. We have a built-in program here within our district. And so the district does it. And for example, in Texas, there's sometimes they have another level between the state and the districts, but they have a region zone there. They can grant these EPP evidence of like a preparation program, but it's not at a traditional university. And so it's like in Florida, there's some situations where if you took the coursework or professional development, like curriculum and design, lesson planning, and then you get these certificates, and there's a certain set of checklist of certificates that you can get, they grant you an alternative license. And that's different from the university. Does that make sense?
So essentially, they're not in an accredited preparation program.
Correct. They're in an accredited, not through a university.
So is there a possibility to add language around accredited or approved? And then the burden would be on someone to create an approved list of preparation programs. We'll just leave that hanging. Dan, you have your hand up.
Yes. So, and Julie and I have had this conversation over the last several months too, because when you look back at 1057-410, paragraph 3, I believe, it does spell out that in order to get the class 2 license, okay, a bachelor's degree from a regionally accredited college or university, completion of an accredited professional educator preparation program, including appropriate supervised teaching experience, as in the terms provided in 57.102, with a recommendation for the license requested for the appropriate official from the educator program. Okay, including, it's all the ors that are in the rest of that paragraph. Qualification for one or more endorsement as outlined in the ARM, or a current license from that area, or let's see, how did Julie put it earlier? Accredited program, or is a state approved program from a regionally accredited college university. So like in Texas's case, that is a state approved program approved by TAE, Texas Accreditation, or TEA, excuse me, Texas Education Accreditation. And yet we have hangups when we come here because we don't follow the letter of some of our language we already have here.
So I am not seeing where you're looking at, but what I heard you say was, or a state approved, which could be language to add to what we have on that slide.
Correct, because that all comes from, 410.
So Dan, when you're looking here, this is Julie.
Yes.
Right. And I know the case you're particularly talking about. I get
and Crystal
cases,
does too.
Dan. Yes,
we just talked
every other day. So when you're looking at like D, okay.
Right.
So I'm down at 4D. Okay. So the particular instance that you're talking about, the individual went through a alternative preparation program. Okay.
Correct.
They hold a current standard, unrestricted out-of-state license. but they had 3 years of successful teaching experience, not 5,
But
as appropriately defined in ARM and as documented by recommendation of an out-of-state accredited school employer. And so that 5-year rule is really hurting us.
Correct,
if you
correct. And
will,
that's
which I think it connects back to a conversation you've all had on this task force a few weeks
Right.
ago.
right.
So Dan, in your district, how many instances of that being a problem have you run across in the last, say, 3 years?
Well, three for sure. But not, okay. One in this exact instance that Julie's referenced there, and Crystal knows too. And then other out-of-state licensure issues due to that. Actually, no, let me take that. I've had 2 in the last year. That's correct, Julie, right? I had another one that was teaching in Kansas that did a program in Texas, and then I had one who was a teacher in Texas who went through the same type of program. So it's 2 in the last year that I've had.
And they
Under
were-
this particular piece, Dan, but you've had like 5. You had some around the praxis. There were
Oh,
2
oh yeah,
praxis
yeah,
issues.
absolutely. Yeah, I've had those, but I just wanted to clarify just on this
Right.
410 piece. Yes.
Yeah, so, but I think the larger question, Chris, if we can go back to the slide that I have, is how many cases do we have where someone comes with a provisional license from another state and wants to get it, to try and get a full license in Montana? Because the framework that we have here, if someone has a license that's a standard license in any other state, this language, this framework that's put forth here would say Montana will grant you a license. What I heard the difficulty was if someone came and they were trying to get a license and they were just coming with a provisional license and hadn't completed an EPP.
I have one right now that's sort of that. And yeah, like a provisional, no EPP, back and forth kind of stuff. I can think of one, but again, I've only been here for 5 months now, I think. I don't know. But
So-
one.
So this gets back to the special case. I think we need to be careful, everybody who works in a district, sometimes you have classrooms that have one student who takes up all of your attention. And then as a result of that, the entire class becomes bad. But it really is just that one student who's causing the problem, right? So if we have these unique cases, we don't want to get bogged down in thinking that these unique cases are actually a problem with the entire arm itself. So we did have one suggestion that came out of there that could address what was the issue of someone coming with a provisional license but didn't have an EPP. And it would be to add some language in this first bullet that says completion of an accredited professional EPP or state approved, or professional accredited or state approved professional EPP. But you still need some student teaching experience. Sue, we haven't heard from you. What? Dang, I was really waxing poetic, guys.
It was good to listen to it, though.
Yeah. Sue, what is your thinking on any of this?
Well, I have a couple of things that I noticed. First of all, I am glad we're talking about the praxis, because I just feel like that's redundant. If we trust our EPP programs, we know, we should have confidence that these people are competent, that they have the skills to become quality teachers. The other thing I'm noticing on here, and in listening to the other discussions, it's about the National Board Certification. I notice on here, it's only listed, or it will only benefit somebody who has a master's degree and the National Board Certification. Now, in looking through the Class 2 information that was just up on the screen, I noticed that they list the bachelor's degree and the National Board Certification. So I'm wondering if under the initial license, where you have the or section, if that needs to have the national board certification in there also. I don't know, maybe that's one of those unusual circumstances too.
Well, no, Sue, that seems like a clear recommendation that we could have someone with a bachelor's degree and national board. And so that could fit over here on the initial license. And I see some
Yeah.
support of that. Anybody opposed to adding that in over here on the initial license, national board, bachelor's degree and a national board? That also would cover you if you had, you'd have a current license too, potentially, but you may not. So that'd be another bullet over here, or national board and IEFA, essentially. Anybody opposed to sticking that in under the initial license?
Jacob, do you know?
Woohoo, I found something.
I think it sounds great. I was just wondering if you have to be in a master's program in order to be national board certified. Maybe I should know that, but that was my only question. Otherwise, I'm totally.
No, you don't.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to. I only have a bachelor's degree and I'm nationally board certified. So.
So Diane, give a thumbs up. John, you turned your camera on. Did you want to talk?
Under 3 in what's already in rule.
Hang on a second. Angela, John, did you want to talk? You turn your camera on?
I turned my camera on because I didn't realize I didn't have it on.
Okay.
But I agree with the national board makes sense. Their requirement is a bachelor's degree and a valid state teaching license, 3 years experience. So it lines up with what we're talking about. The only thing that's a little wonky with national board is world language has to also take the ACTFL test and score advanced, low, or higher. But that's the only wrinkle there that would be different than what we've talked about.
Angela, I'm sorry. What was your point?
Thank you. I guess, and maybe I'm at a different point in the conversation than others, but I guess I'm looking at 1057-410, 3 subpoint D, and it speaks to a current license from the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards.
That is correct, Angela. In the state of Montana, you can get a initial license or a standard 2 license through a national board with a bachelor's degree. So it should be in column and under the initial license as well as the second if we're talking about current rule.
And what that does is it grants a path up for someone who might come with a national board. If they want to move up in licensure, they then would obtain a master's degree as well.
Yes, and so Jacob, just to clarify very, very quickly, there are currently 3 pathways to an additional license in the state of Montana or a standard teacher license. That's completing a traditional EPP with the supervised student teaching. The second pathway is through national board certification. And the third is through an alternative EPP program with supervised teaching plus 5 years of experience. So those are the current 3 pathways in current rule.
Right. Let's have the praxis conversation then. So this is highlighted as for an initial license. Is praxis a method of measuring competency? Yes or no? And do others need to be put in there? Sue, you had a clear thought on this. Could I ask you to say it again?
I certainly can. I think the praxis needs to come out of there completely. I think it's redundant. If they come through the EPP program, we should have confidence in that program that they are advancing good candidates.
McCall?
Thanks, Jacob. I would hesitate getting rid of the praxis altogether. I think that it's, again, one of our test to test competencies of our teachers. But I also think that we might trust our EPPs in Montana, but don't necessarily speak or know what other EPPs across the US might look like. So I'd like to see us have a conversation about what it looks like to keep the praxis, and if folks are interested in maybe adding another layer to that of maybe an additional or alternative test. But I would hesitate getting rid of the praxis altogether.
So go ahead. Corinna, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
I'm in agreement with Sue for getting rid of it altogether.
I was going to point out that in the readings we looked at last week, several states have multiple measures or demonstrations of competency, praxis being one, and then they might have portfolio or other pieces.
Portfolio, your experience. Yeah. Jacob, should I put those questions that I had that we were saving for the end? It might guide this a little bit, or do you think that we should just keep going?
Well, what was the specific question that you're thinking of?
Well, just a different, like, if we're keeping the praxis, do we use it for just endorsement, initial, all that piece?
Yeah, let's save that, because right now I think what we've got in front of us is 2 points. One is the praxis to get that first license. Is it necessary? We're hearing yes and no. And then currently it's not there to sort of advance, right? Or anybody who may be coming in from out of state, if they have an out of state license and a master's degree, we're not showing the praxis as necessary. We're also not requiring in this framework the praxis for anybody coming from out of state to get an initial license if they have, you know, less than 3 years experience in a standard license. The real question first is, for first time teachers, do they need to take the praxis?
Jacob, can you pull up rule really quick to show folks how that currently reads on initial license? So it is 1057-410. It's 4. It reads, if the educator preparation program completed by the applicant is not in Montana, upon initial application of a class 1 or 2 license, the applicant must provide a proof of a minimum passing score on the praxis subject assessment. So my question is, do we, right? So that's the question, Heather, right? So are we saying that we are requiring it only for out of state, in state, everyone, some, initial? So I have some questions around that. Thank you for showing that.
Or for adding an endorsement. Those were the questions that I had on that slide. So Julie just said them all.
So a couple questions. The first question was, are EPPs requiring it? We've discussed that. Make sure I get this correct. It's not a requirement of an EPP. They do build it into their program because it is a requirement of licensure, which is an ARM requirement. So there's a separation there. You don't have to complete the praxis to get your degree. You just have to complete it to get your licensure, which technically is after you finish your program. And is anybody on the praxis subcommittee who would like to report to us on ideas? John, you have your hand up, and then coming to Karina.
Yeah, so you said it really well, Jacob. So I won't reiterate what you said. I am on the praxis work committee as well on the higher ed side. And looking at the praxis, it's important to remember it's one piece of our MAC, the Montana way we recommend candidates for licensure. We also look at their content GPA from all of their content coursework, and then their cooperating teacher during their student teaching experience evaluates their content knowledge as well. So it's 3 measures of content that we have at this time. Praxis is one of those measures that we use.
Karina.
Oh, I just lowered my hand, but thank you.
Sorry. Christine.
I was on the subcommittee, the work committee, and we noted that 41 states did have either the praxis or another kind of proficiency device test. And so we're talking about the majority of other states and their EPPs have that already in place. And of the 9 states that didn't, the statistic that we came up with was about half of those, so I think it was 5, those scores were better than the majority of the other states. They were in the top 10 or something like that. So whatever they do is pretty, their student scores. So whatever they are doing for preparation for their teachers is working well. So for us to have this requirement as part of licensure is almost redundant. Our state is already requiring it as part of their teacher prep. That's the college's decision. That's a fine place for it to be. And then for the licensure for the out of state, almost every other state is doing it. And those that aren't are doing well.
Okay. Quick clarification there though, Christine. It's not a part of an EPP program. It's not required by any university to take the praxis. Did I hear you say that it was?
I thought that Mike is the one who I thought brought that forward, and I did message him and I haven't heard from him, but I believe that it's not just the praxis. They have some other proficiency testing, not just the praxis, but it is still teacher proficiency testing. So try to get with him. He's the one who brought that to our group.
Yeah, so we're going to get to Dan and then we're going to come to Crystal. And so I'm going to go back to what John, I think, just clarified was to obtain a degree from a university in an educator preparation program, you do not need the praxis. Currently, they use what is the MAC framework to guide recommendations for teacher licensure, which includes content area GPA and the praxis. And a big part of that, of having the praxis in there, is because it's a part of licensure, but it is not a hard and fast requirement in any EPP program.
Okay, Jacob, but we're talking about from other states. Are you talking about other states?
Oh no, I'm talking about Montana. Sorry.
No, I was talking about the other states. 40, because we're talking about out-of-state licensure too, correct? I'm not off topic, am I?
No, you're good. I'm sorry. I'm
Okay.
confused.
So 41 of the other states already have either the praxis or another teacher proficiency. Now, our state, I'm not talking about our state and our prep program. I'm talking about licensure specifically from other states and requiring that praxis from another state. Our committee felt like if our university systems needed to have the praxis as part of their licensure, then that was in their realm. That is not according to us. That's within their purview. But as for licensing other state people, 41 states had another test or the praxis already in there. And of those states that were left, the majority of them had higher scoring student proficiency scores. So they're doing a good job even without a proficiency test.
I got you. Thanks. Sorry for the clarification, for my confusion, but I appreciate the clarification. Dan.
All right, yes. So I'll just say this about the praxis. If we are going to keep it, then the score must have meaning. And so therefore, when you have a teacher from out of state who does take a praxis and passes it, it should just be game over at that point. All these other requirements, if you're going to have a scoring standard, have a scoring standard and let it stand by itself. And all these other measures that are used, oh, you only have, 4 years of teaching experience, but we require 5, or you only have 2. If they have the content, they know what they're doing, that's where I come down on the praxis thing. If they're going to keep it, it's got to have meaning, and there has to be, there has to be something to it. So when you have a master teacher of 35 years from another state that won't take the praxis because they think it's just a ridiculous exercise in trying, for them to gain licensure, and you lose that teacher, that's how it affects a school. But yeah, that's where I stand.
Thank you, Dan. Can you go back to the slide, Crystal, and then I'll come to you. And so that's, Dan, exactly to your point. Like, the question before us right now is, like, in this framework that's in front of us, there's no praxis requirement for an out-of-state teacher. So all the conversation we've had in this group, right, sort of lead to these bullet points.
Yes.
Is there stuff here that's not missing? Okay, or that is missing. So, in this framework that we're proposing is saying, like, this is what the group has said to this point. There's no praxis. So we for out-of-state included.
Right, but I'm also saying, I mean, if it was a part of a portfolio, then let it mean something. That's what I'm saying. If it remains there, if you can pass your praxis, I mean, let it mean something. Then all the other positions behind it don't necessarily have to matter. Because if you're showing your proficiency on the exam, that should stand for it. But I agree. I see I know what you're talking about with the out-of-state licensure praxis or not.
Right. Okay, so Crystal, sorry for making you wait.
That's okay. What I want to say is kind of now distant from the conversation, but I'll try to get us back there. So I guess my take on it, and as I've been working on cases and looking at this and working with Dan, it was 2 teachers you lost due to the praxis, I believe. So I hear you. And I guess the whole in-state, out-of-state, and I'm just not understanding that piece at all, and why an in-state person is able to have other avenues to get licensed. So if they don't pass the praxis, but have a high GPA and other areas within that MAC system, they'll still get a license. But an out-of-state person who may only have missed the praxis by 1 or 2 points has to keep taking it. Well, what if their GPA was high in their EPP and they had different areas? So this whole MAC with the praxis not meaning as much, I think goes to Dan's point. It needs to mean something across the board. It shouldn't matter if you're in state or out of state. The score should matter, or we shouldn't have it at all. And it's kind of woven into the conversation, but I can, as we talk more, I can raise my hand again to continue.
Thank you, Crystal. And in this framework, that's not an issue. Right? Like, it's, if they got the license in the other state, it's not a problem.
Exactly. It was just part of the conversation as to what we have now.
Angela, you had your hand up.
Thank you. I really appreciate this good conversation. One of the things that I spoke to a couple of weeks ago was the nature that the praxis score does matter for in-state and out-of-state. In fact, I had answered a call from a superintendent who was struggling to hire a teacher who had just completed one of our EPPs who had not yet passed the praxis. So I think there's legitimacy for in-state and out-of-state, I mean, in this conversation. I think Dan and his point really resonates with me in that it's kind of an, if we do this, then maybe some of these other pieces might look a little different. And I think that that's where I'm at too, whether it is with the praxis or the number of years of experience. So I think it's great that we're having a conversation singularly about the praxis, but I think it's difficult for me and maybe some other folks here on the call to take each of these items singular, absent of any other pieces. So Dan, what you just spoke to there really resonated with me on that front. And then if I could just go way back to the conversation about the unusual cases and the licensure efforts. I guess what I'm hearing from Julie and what I'm hearing from Dan is he had 2 cases with an out-of-state teacher in 1 year. That's powerful to me. Julie spoke to the fact that they're seeing high frequency at the OPI with that similar issue, lacking the number of years experience. And I guess in addition to your 2 specifically, Dan, I'm trying to wrap my head around some concrete numbers. I mean, are we talking year 2, maybe plus another 2 down the road in Glasgow? Are we talking another 2 down the road in Lewistown? And it's really something we need to address in 57. And that's really what I'm trying to grapple with. And I did see a couple of questions around that data. So do we know what that looks like as a whole, as to what comes into OPI and what the number of years, when the number of years is a barrier for folks? Do we have solid numbers like annually on a 3-year effort or 5 years? Do we know?
Well, let's clarify what the question is, because I heard some different situations that are put forward. So my understanding of the situations that Dan ran into was a teacher who had been through an alternative program, but had obtained a license in another state, but did not yet have 3 years. Then there was some question or confusion around the possibility of teachers who may be coming with provisional licenses. And those are 2 different things. So Dan, am I correct that your issues really centered around that alt program came with a license, but didn't have 3 years. So in the current structure, they couldn't get a Montana license?
That's correct.
Okay. So then again, for our best synthesis of the conversations, we have addressed that with this framework here. And the question is, like, does this work? Because if they're coming with a license, and even if they have less than 3 years of license, they're eligible for an initial license in this framework. That would address that. Now there could be a secondary question around what do we, if somebody wants to come with a provisional license from another state, how do we want to treat that? That's a different thing. Dan.
Yeah, Jacob, can we just do me a visual favor? Is there any way we could put that topic like under what do we keep and what's missing? Like this is for out-of-state licensure applicants. Is there any way? Because yes, I mean, I look up at there and I'm already, you know, I mean, I'm off topic. So if there's a visual for me to direct me, that would be great. And I think that's also some of the things like what Crystal had said, that we, you know, not realizing that this is just an out-of-state licensure pathway that you have up here on the screen.
No, it's not. It's in-state as well.
Okay.
It's not. No. So it's, but we're in this framework, we're not differentiating between out-of-state or in-state licenses. The teacher license is a teacher license.
Okay.
Right?
All right. That was my confusion then.
And you know, which is a next question. You know, I mean, again, people can bring up like, does that need to be here? Do we inherently think other licenses from other states are different? But in this framework from the conversations, we are not differentiating. You know, if you come with a license, it's good. We have hands up. Christine.
So I don't see anything about state license. Is this international as well? Or is this just within the United States? That's something that's missing.
That's a good question. So if it was if they came with a current standard teacher license in good standing, the question would be, do we need to differentiate between a license obtained in the United States or a license obtained outside the United States? Is that the question, Christine?
She gave a thumbs up. Yep.
Okay, good. Sorry, I made a mess of the last thing, so I want to make sure I got this right. So let's discuss that question, then we'll get to McCall and Angela have their hands up. So is there a need to differentiate between international teaching licenses and U.S. obtained teaching licenses? John, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think there probably is a bit of a difference between international licensing and US licensing, and that happens in other professions as well. And so if we took a cue from other professions, they do look at those differently. You can't run off to another country and get a doctor's license or a nurse's license and then come back to the US and automatically gain licensure based on that. So there probably is a little bit of a difference, but it might be one of those things where it'd be really good to have an in-depth look at it and what that would look at. When you get into internet or into licenses from other countries, we also start talking about visas and work permits and a whole host of other things. So I almost feel like that should be a subtopic for another time.
Good point. Christine, did you want to have a secondary comment on that?
I think that we need to have some other vetting process for internationals. And I think the praxis, this is an appropriate place for the praxis. We can do it by content and possibly pedagogy. But I think that we'd also need, that's my opinion, that we should go ahead and include some more vetting than just that. So maybe another column for international licensee.
Dan.
Me?
Sorry, yeah, I did want to point out that 57.112 for exchange teachers, we do differentiate for exchange and give them a class 5. And so, if there's a way to expand upon that with foreign teachers until a qualification is met, that we come up here through this, that would be another fabulous direction to go.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Diane, did you put your hand down?
Yes, I did. I think generally, I think, of course, out of US licenses would need close scrutiny. We know some countries that have been coming, where their teachers have been coming to Montana. And certainly we could look at those more closely so that we get an answer that might help some of our schools. And so I'm for looking at this more closely, but carefully.
Crystal, do we have a count of how many internationally licensed teachers we license a year? And I think we want to add that as another conversation at a later date.
Yeah, we're gonna have to come back to it.
Okay, Julie.
Jacob, I just was wondering if we could get to some, maybe firming up this discussion to say, for this provisional license column, do we have any agreement around for a provisional license, any teacher would need a bachelor's degree from accredited institution, been enrolled in and have a plan of study and a verified completion of EFA, and of course the background check. Is that enough? Do we want to keep that? Is there something missing? And then in the initial license column, same question. What are we thinking for an initial license? Bachelor's degree, completion of an EPP with supervised teaching, praxis in out, verified completion of the EFA, or if this isn't it, standard out-of-state teaching license, is that with no less than 3 years experience or 3 years experience? And then the verified. So this is almost the initial. Also, what are people thinking? Is this something that we would move with, not move with? What do we think? So I'm just wondering if we can get to some action on this. That's my question. Thanks.
We can. McCall and Angela have both been waiting very patiently though. So after they get to speak, then we'll move back to that conversation. McCall.
Thanks, Jacob. And actually my comments were kind of to that I think that there's some things missing maybe in the initial license or category. So if you want to go back and start over, I'm happy to wait until we get to that point to make my comments.
Thank you. Angela?
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too. And I don't know if you want those, what I think is missing right now, either on the provisional or the initial license. I do appreciate Julie's approach because I do have some pieces there. And I guess just as we get to that place, I think that Julie just suggested, I guess I appreciate your effort, Jacob, to clarify a few moments ago what the conversation and the question on the table. But I'm not any further along in understanding where the numbers are on those folks who come in from Montana and who are lacking the number of years of experience. to understand, to know for sure what direction I think would be best on that. Do we have those concrete numbers? How many folks are coming in and are short those number of years as per the statute as it exists today? And then do you want the pieces that I think are missing right now?
Let's ask about the, let's hold it for 5 minutes. Let's ask about the provisional license first. Is there anything in that column that is missing or doesn't need to be there to grant someone a provisional license to teach in Montana currently? We have hands. See who they are. John, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. The only thing that I see would be nice to have would be where it says in an accredited EPP program would be maybe a Montana accredited EPP program. You know, and we have that language in the BPE internship, you know, so if someone is in that program, but we don't have it in the class 5, that it has to be specifically a program approved in Montana.
And Montana has a list of accredited programs that they approve.
Correct.
Currently, right. So just to clarify that, that's not an in Montana program. It's just a program that's on the list.
It's a program that our accreditors in this state have vetted and approved as leading to licensure in Montana.
Angela.
Okay, so just on the provisional column, one thing that I have heard that might be of interest to this group is, so we're provisionally licensing folks with a plan to complete within 3 years. I'm wondering about some language that would speak to progress towards program completion. Just so after the year, after the 3 years of the provisional, they can move into a standard license. So I just wonder about a reporting mechanism that might exist there. And I know that there's conversations with the EPPs, but I'm wondering if through licensure, there's a way to make sure that we're supporting them and not just saying, okay, yep, you've got this 3 years, you can go and you can teach and you can work. And then at the 3 years, not be any further along on having a teacher who can teach for longer than that in Montana. So progress towards completion. And then, of course, you've all heard me beat the drum, whether a person is provisional or whether they're coming in from out of state, whether they're a pre-service teacher in Montana or a Montana prepared teacher and they've completed the program. I really would like to see verification of a plan of mentorship and induction for 2 years.
So Angela, I have thought about that over the course of the week, and there's further clarification that I need. And it goes back to the purpose of Chapter 57. So I think what I hear you saying is that the mentorship piece is really about helping retain. And the question I have is for the group is, do we think 57 is where we do that? Or is 57 focused on the licensure process and retention falls somewhere else? I don't have the answer. I'm just something I want to put before the group. Diane.
You know, what I'm thinking about is that as we're listening to folks and seeking to perhaps put more flexibility in the system, I've heard stories where folks just come in and get a provisional and teach for 3 years and then they're just gone. And so we have them coming, they're making a choice. They make a choice to only teach in Montana 3 years. If we were to have more assistance and support for them, they may choose to stay. And so I think that is part of what we're looking at in Chapter 57. It's a tough one because it's a part of trying to keep teachers here. Once we license them, that they're just not gone in 3 years. And maybe that's anecdotal and I don't know how often that happens, but I've heard it happens a lot. So I'd be interested in knowing, are there teachers who are choosing, or folks that might be able to work toward a more license, a more robust license, and they're just choosing to come in for 3 years get the provisional and go. Is there someone that can help me with that or give me the information?
I think across the board, teachers who enter the profession leave within the first 3 years. It doesn't have to just be a provisional license. That's pretty well established. And there's a myriad of factors for that. I didn't see who had their hand up first. McCall, I'll go to you and then to Christine.
Thanks, Jacob. We currently have 2 provisional licenses in Montana. So the 5A license is for 1 year and allows for folks who haven't passed the praxis of a year to teach while they, and then have that year then to study and then pass the praxis. Would that still fit under this provisional license? Because it's not necessary, and I realize we're still talking about if we're keeping the praxis or not, but I guess my point is that it would not fit necessarily under this, the way that we have the provisional license written now, if it's just that 5A to pass the praxis in that 1 year. So that's just a consideration.
Yeah, I think McCall, whatever implications happen with that initial license would impact that 5A. So it's probably a secondary conversation. Right? Does that make sense? If we eliminate the praxis. Yeah. And now Christine.
I just wanted to address Diane's question about the 3 years. And, we hire them in our districts. So we would still be vetting them. They would still have to meet our process. We don't have to keep them for 3 years because of the tenure law. So this isn't a commitment for the whole 3 years, nor is it a guarantee that they'll get it in 3 years. But there are needs in our schools that are being filled with emergency certifications. Larry Crowder in Culbertson makes this point at our superintendent meetings, regional meetings frequently, how he can have an emergency cert person in there and has much more qualified people who can't get their license or because they're still working through the whole provisional process to get it going. And that makes no sense. You've got somebody who's almost there that can't seem to get everything in line in time, and someone who just simply has none of the qualification, was a para in somewhere sometime, or is a parent and you just need a warm body and they can get an emergency. So think on that. We are still vetting at district level who we will hire.
So Christine, can I hear the situations that come up? Can you expand upon the impact of what we see in front of us of what you just said? Is there something you would adjust, or what is there something here that limits and compounds the situation you discussed?
No, I think what's in front of us looks pretty good, but I'm just saying Diane had the question about 3 years and the fact that is that enough time? Is that too much time? Are they going to leave? And I don't think that's a discussion for this group. I think that's can be handled at the local level.
Thank you, Christine. Angela, you have your hand up, and then Erica, I want to try to get an answer to your question after Angela.
Thank you very much. You asked a good question, Jacob, about the purposes of Chapter 57, which someone took some time to put out there. The very purpose of this part of administrative rule is making sure that we have licensed teachers in the classroom that meet a certain threshold. And I think what will go a long way to making sure that we have licensed teachers in the classroom is mentorship. I mean, it's really at the crux. I mean, I don't think that they're separate. I think that they are one and the same in making sure that we have embedded in licensure a plan to support our licensed professionals. And so I mean, I think that was your question, and I just wanted to make sure that I replied to it. I mean, I don't think that they're separate and different, that they are one and the same. What we need to be doing, and we have an opportunity through 57, is supporting our licensed teachers as they're teaching, hopefully to a greater likelihood that they will stay as licensed teachers in Montana.
And Erica asked a question about being able to work on multiple licenses at one time. It's outside of my understanding. Julie or Crystal, do you see that? Can you respond to that?
Jacob, yeah, I just would need a little bit more clarification, I guess. So I just want to, again, kind of maybe do a process check, if you will. So maybe what we need to be able to do is take note of what some things that people feel are missing, like McCall had brought up, potentially under the first column, it could be the 5A, and that is dependent upon the praxis component, of course, whether that is or not there. And then I think, looking at that initial license column, again, do we have consensus around what we would keep or what we wouldn't, what's missing? And then moving into that second level. So maybe that's a piece we need to take note of between now and next week, so we can maybe make some, decisions about how we get a license. Because we certainly aren't talking about how to advance or keep it at this moment, but there are places where people might be pursuing 2 licenses at the same time, or additional endorsements, not necessarily license to answer that direct question. Because I do, Jacob, want to honor that people did some homework, and we do need to kind of get a sense of, at least in that chapter or subsection 1 and 2, what folks have identified as intensive. So just want to propose a process check. Thanks. Not sure where the group wants to go.
Thanks, Julie. And I think the internal agenda is we got about just 5 more minutes on this conversation, and then Crystal's going to jump into that. And we wanted to discuss a plan for helping move that into next week too, around the notes. What I'm hearing, and I think the next steps, and Julie and Crystal, you tell me here, is that we are going to come back with this next week with what are the recommendations we've heard today, and vote on whether they're included or not. And that has been for provisional license, implications around 5A potentially. But then there has been Angela's mention of some sort of support mechanism. I wonder if that's not a demonstration of competency or provisional that a teacher would need to complete. And then there's certainly still sort of a yes, no on the praxis for the initial license. And I want to hear like last comments on that. We hear a lot of no's and some yeses. Does anybody have other recommendations for possible measures of competency that could be there that we could discuss? Angela, go ahead.
Well, I really like how you framed that. And I mean, I guess I would be, I guess intrigued by a notion of, if we didn't do the praxis, and you referenced it as the competency piece, but instead we went to a greater length in this initial license to ensure support, to grow competency, to support all folks in state, out of state, coming to the United States, perhaps through a mentoring and induction. And I guess I would just add that here to the licensure that would be initial for all initial licensees in Montana. I like how you put the demonstration of competency and then how you frame that even with the mentorship piece, Jacob. Thank you.
So, I mean, we refer to it in this conversation as participation in a mentorship, but I think if we think about it as a demonstration of competency, then the language in the rule becomes something to the effect of verification from a school district of completion of satisfactory something, and not just necessarily the mentorship piece, right? Because completing a mentorship is not necessarily a demonstration of competency. But if you frame it as a competency, then the districts have the freedom to provide the mentorship to make sure that they are competent. So make note of that if we can. Crystal, for next week, we want to add that to the bullets, and we're going to vote on what needs to be included. Last thoughts. Sharon, we'll note that too and come back to it, and it may come up in just the next piece of the conversation as well. key things that like last time to comment at this point today on key things that might be missing for a provisional license or an initial license that we haven't talked about. McCall.
Thanks, Jacob. A couple comments I would make, and again, this is back to the praxis, but I think under the or category, we may have to also include praxis, at least for this initial license. I see that as a potentially missing piece. And then the other one is under the or category. I know that it says somebody who has a bachelor's degree and a current standard license, but should we also ensure that that current standard license is from an accredited professional EPP that included supervised teaching experience? Because I know that's something that is in there right now. Just my thoughts on looking at it initially.
So McCall, the agenda item number 1 at the next meeting is going to be follow up on that point to explain why you think that is an essential piece to add in. If that works for you. The question being, I mean, the underlying question being, what is the inherent difference between someone's preparation who another state granting someone a full license? Why does Montana need that additional demonstrations of competency when they come to Montana? Does that make sense? Yeah, you don't have to answer it now. I just want to see if you're clear with my question. And I want to have that conversation next week. Sort of.
Nope, I'm happy to wait till next week. And frankly, I'm not sure I know the answer either. So I'll do some research on that. Thanks.
Yeah, well, that's what we can think about it. So it's getting into that, like, what inherently do we think is different from another state's license that Montana doesn't trust? is kind of the piece we're getting to. Other final comments before I hand it over to Crystal. Yep, Jewel, we'll capture that. That's a great conversation. Okay, well, I'm going to now hand it over to Crystal to take us home and leave us with next steps to move us into further action moving forward.
Okay, so I put the definition from what Julie noted. I'd already had it up there, what supervised teaching experience, the clarification for Sharon. And then, yeah, I don't. So we're getting into our ARM subchapter work, and I have 7 minutes. So I don't really know where to go with it except to maybe prep us for next week. I really want you to dive into the areas in each subchapter where you think there needs to be some enhancements or extensive work. And that's what the homework was that was posted on Monday. And then I came back yesterday saying, I understand some people had issues. So just to pay attention to subchapter 1 and 2, because that's what we would get to today. And yet we still aren't going to get there. So I guess for next week, after we address the things that Jacob just said with McCall and voting on the license, initial and provisional licenses, we're going to get into this because really I'm getting to the point where I feel like we're just staying on one area and we're going to miss so much. And it really concerns me. So you have access to the Google form. Google Sheet, where I have put out all of the rules titles, and then you fill out, what you think and have comments. I did receive Sharon's, and Sharon, that was perfect. Exactly what I was thinking in terms of the areas that you think need to be enhanced or intensive work, and any comments just to have for you to have a discussion on. Julie and I did this last Friday as well for the OPI in terms of what we're seeing at licensure committee and through the work that we've done. So we have those to provide on our stand. It keeps being asked, how many of these cases? Well, since I've been here, there have been a lot of similar cases, but different. Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have any way of documenting how many of each, I mean, through MSIS, but I don't know, maybe you have a way of looking through historical data that Angela's asking for in terms of how many cases, but I think just with the experience between what you've done in the past over the past year and what I've done, and then I know I have a lot of input from my licensure specialists who have been here for 30 plus years. We will be able to give some recommendations as well. So I'm not even going to go into the sub chapters of where we were. So for the homework, I guess right now I need to know, is anyone having issues still with accessing it? Because there really should not be an issue with that. If you could please make a copy so that you're not using the one that I did, because then everyone will have that as the copy. That's one step that I know can be just a little confusing. And again, this is for you to have and to share with us, just so we can kind of see collectively and help bring the conversation forward. So if, example, if 6 of you are saying we need to really look at that unusual case piece and give comments as to why, it's a good way for us to have a conversation around it without getting completely off topic and going down different avenues. It'll keep us really focused into what areas that we still need recommendations for. So that's the purpose. There is purpose behind it. And I think we should have probably done this weeks and weeks ago. But now we are here and we have the guidance that this is, how we're going to do it. So I think that it's going to be really effective and productive and hopefully get us rolling a little faster. And when I say faster, I don't mean that the conversation isn't important, but we also do have to really be conscious of our time. And I think that this will help us with that. With that said, if you could share your, when you have your copy done, your copy with Tristan at her OPI Connect. It's right in the directions, and we'll just copy that over to next week because it's the exact same. There's nothing new, so you don't need to be waiting for any new documents or any new updates. So everything that is there for this week will just be moved over to next week because we did not get to it. And I think that that's the direction that we're going to go for the remaining meetings. With that said, obviously now I have to change our topics a little bit for each session. We'll kind of tie up those loose ends, and I'm only giving Jacob a little bit of time next week so we can get into the sub chapters. Sorry, Jacob. And then, really focus in, hopefully at least through 1 through 4. 4 is a huge one though. So I don't know, I might move us around a little bit and then have 4 be its own week. But as you can see, we have the Board of Public Ed meeting on the 16th. So there will be no meeting for us that week. We're looking at trying to finalize our recommendations by the 30th. CISPAC is meeting on October 14th. Correct me if is that correct, McCall? Okay, I see you nodding your head. I didn't get confirmation of that, but I thought that that was the case. So, we really want to try to get to all the areas that everybody feels is important, in this timeline. Here is Tristan's OPI Connect again, so that when you are done with the homework, you can send that to her. And any questions, feel free, please email. I am very busy working on emergency authorizations, and my phone rings off the hook and I don't always see it. So if you really, it doesn't mean I'm ignoring it. I can't even begin to tell you how many things are coming in. So if you could email me, I see that much faster, and I'm checking email at night at home as well. So if you need me, that's probably the best way. Val, go ahead.
So I made a copy of the sheet, and then at one point it says share with, and it showed, I think that you were on there, Tristan was on there, maybe Julie there was like 5 people on there where it was shared. So do I need to make a copy of that and email it to you too, or is it not a shared document?
No,
I'm kind of confused.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And it may be, I may just not have seen. Sharon just emailed hers in a PDF, and so that just caught my eye. So sorry, I didn't mean to give her the gold star and nobody else. I just happened to see that one because it came in that way. So we'll look through. Tristan, I'll make.
So mine look, I mean, it looked like it's on the drive because
Oh, man,
like
I
I've
like
gone.
gold stars.
No fair, Sharon. Overachiever.
I know.
So when I go back, like I've been back and forth several times, and when I go back, my stuff is saved and it's on the drive and it's showing that it's sharing. In fact, I have it open right now. It's showing that it's sharing with who am I sharing with? It's sharing with Crystal, Eric, Jacob, Julie, and Tristan.
Yeah, Valerie, I do have that saved, and we should all be able to see it. So, and then I can share that folder that I've saved it in to the rest of the task force members so that everyone can see everyone's responses.
And the reason I'm asking for that is sometimes you see somebody's response and you go, oh, I never thought about that. So it makes you think a little bit more. Or somebody's already put that down and it's like I could just say I agree and not have to go in through the whole spiel again. So that's kind of why I want to see everybody's.
Definitely.
Okay.
And Tristan,
Perfect. And
I
it'll just
see that. So why don't you get with, maybe I don't have the right settings. So if you see some of them, that's great. And knowing that it's working.
Okay. Yeah, we'll troubleshoot it. We'll get it fixed.
Okay. So I can just continue where it's at in that drive and just keep going.
Yep, Valerie, you're good.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sharon?
Yeah, and that is sometimes, I've done this before, I've been on the receiving end of those things sometimes too, and it is hard sometimes when you share a file with somebody else via the drive, because then somebody can accidentally type in it, and then it looks like your work, you know? So that's why I always submit just by email, if you don't mind, in the PDF, but it's true though, that now you can't see my response. Not everybody can see my responses, so we'll just do whatever you want.
Yeah, no, and I had that thought with you doing it this way, and I agree, and that's why I was really careful in the directions to say copy, put your name to the copy so that you're not overwriting somebody else's. In all reality, I did some of this with and didn't get to talk to you about this today, with the feedback group, and we used a Google form as kind of a side way of where they were putting information, but since this is public and you are the voting members, I didn't want to do it that way. That was just for them to give us feedback. So there really isn't a good answer. I can't tell you how many times I've sat up trying to think about, what's the best way to get this information down. And this is the best I came up with. So I apologize if it's confusing. I tried to make it as easy as possible, but we will do our best. I mean, if you want to shoot an email to Tristan and I and say, hey, I submitted it, will you check? We can absolutely do that, just so that, you are comfortable in knowing that your information is there. Anything else?
Crystal, I was just going to say, no, Angela had mentioned a couple of times. I heard you. I'm sitting over here listening. Just kind of a request maybe for a data view, even if it's like a shorter window, to get some sense of how often we're seeing this issue come through about the experience. Crystal's right. It is kind of complicated when you look at, because there's situations where we know we've actually denied a license, but not everyone gets through the entire process. And there could be people that don't apply, even initiate it, because they don't have the 5 years. So it's a complicated question, but I'm going to take a look just to at least get a sense for you, Angela, and I know maybe for the rest of the group as well, to maybe just have a little bit of data that could support that. And so I'll take a look and see what I can come up with. I know I have lots of different data, right? It's just, how do you bring the right set of data or multiple sets of data that could help with that? So let me see what I can get, and I'll dig in a little bit for you. I know I'm looking for the praxis data too. So I have a few sets of data I need to gather. I guess that's what I get for being having a PhD, huh? Have to love data. All right. Thank you guys. And I'll do that for you all.
Sharon, is your hand up again? No. Okay. Tristan, does the chat save when we exit out? Because I want to capture how many people said that they submitted it that I don't see, just so we don't lose track of that. Does it save?
Yes, it does.
Okay. Okay, then we're good.
It takes about a half hour to download.
Oh,
but I'll
no,
send it to you.
yeah, tomorrow's wonderful.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. To be continued, and I appreciate your feedback and feel we're getting somewhere. Sorry, it's been sort of slow moving, but you know, we're getting there and doing our best, and appreciate your time so very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you next week. Thank you.